welcome to another exciting Copperland video about living on gold. As we mentioned the last time, we're going to get to the origins of gold. If you're out there in the field and you don't know where gold comes from, you don't know how it's coming up out of the earth, you're wasting your time. You're working for nothing. So what we're going to do is go back to the origins of gold. Where does it come from? And that takes us back to the creation of the universe. Okay, on our board we've simply labeled origins of gold. Where does it come from? Real simple. When the universe was not formed yet, God invented matter. Now matter was invented in a very, very simple form. Very, very simple. One particle. You had a proton, and you had what they call an electron shell. Proton has a positive charge. The electron has a negative charge. There are a lot of theories about the structure of the atom. There are at least two very different theories about how atomic structure really is. One is an old planetary design where people try to explain the positive proton is like the sun, and there's a spinning particle orbiting around it called the electron. That's like the Earth orbiting around the sun. Now, that was the old theory, and the only reason they put that out there was so people without a lot of scientific training could sort of grasp the idea of atomic structure. Well, after that came the Maxwell Planck and the quantum theory. And the quantum theory is that each electron shell has a specific, very specific quantum of energy that keeps certain electrons in certain orbital shells, each one a little bit different. You have an inner electron shell, usually with, they call it one electron. The next shell out, you have a couple of electrons and so on. So you have 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. You have quantum numbers of shells with quantum numbers of energies, and the quantum is that there's a specific amount of energy in each of these shells, and it's exact every time. In the early theories, they thought that the electron was doing a really random orbit around the proton. It could occupy space close to the proton or out here. And of course, that just didn't hold up because certain characteristics and experiments showed that electrons, or the electron shells, have very, very specific energies to them, and that's the quantum theory. Well, neither one is correct because neither one actually explains all the characteristics of the atomic structure. The quantum theory leaves a few things out, and of course the orbital theory just doesn't explain much at all. Well, probably the only place you're ever going to hear the true story about atomic structure is here. The fact is, there is no electron. If there are electrons, electrons are particles. Protons are particles. Neutrons are particles. They have to abide by either the constant of energy doctrine or thermodynamics. And thermodynamics simply says that if this electron is orbiting around some center proton. Eventually it has to run out of energy. It'll collapse into the center. It'll merge with the proton and create a neutron. Neutrons are created by firing high-speed electrons into a group of protons, and if that electron and the proton merges together, it's a balance of power, exact balance of power, and it creates the neutron. So that's the old doctrine. Now, like I told you, you're only going to hear this here. The real atomic structure is you have a proton in the center, positive charge. That's a known fact. Around the proton, you have an equal charge, which is some distance out from the center of the proton. This is not a particle orbiting around the center or the nucleus. Otherwise, it would have to abide by the constancy of energy. It would have to abide by thermodynamic principles, which say if it's in motion, it has to expend energy, therefore it has to lose energy, orbit down, and crash into the nucleus. What you have here, they call this the electron shell. The electron shell is not made up of a particle orbiting around at random. It's actually a sphere of electromagnetic energy. It's not a proton, it's not a neutron, it's not a proton, it's not an electron yet. It only becomes an electron once it's emitted from the atomic structure. Now, a good way to understand that is if you understand light emissions from atoms, like with lasers. If you put either heat or an electrical charge on certain atoms, then this electron shell will suddenly grow in size to that size. It'll remain here for about 1 or 2 billionths of a second, and then it'll jump back down, sort of like the electromagnetic principle of a transformer. You're creating an electromagnetic force, and then it collapses back down. When it collapses down or decays back down, you have a photon that's given off, which is a particle of light. It's a particle that acts like a wave. The same is true of electrons. There is no electron orbiting around the proton. It's a sphere of electromagnetic force. Now, when you impart either heat, electricity, magnetism to this electromagnetic sphere, it grows in size. And if you have say you draw out copper or aluminum or something into a wire, and you're causing a magnetic field to charge this orbit up into this orbit, when it decays back down, it can transfer this force. It actually creates an electron, which is then cascaded down a wire, and as it's cascading down a wire, it has EMF, or electromagnetic force. But it's not an electron until it leaves the atom. Just like there is no photon until this shell collapses down to this shell and emits that photon, which is a particle going out like a wave. Same with the electron. It's only a particle when it's emitted from the atomic structure. Yeah, you can have free electrons, but they're not created, or they're not even formed until there's a collapse of EMF or electromagnetic force. That's when the electron is actually created. That's the only way to understand all the characteristics of the atom, where they all fit, is if this is not a particle. The electron is not a particle. It's electromagnetic shell, just like transformer's electromagnetic force. When it finally collapses down, it's like in a transformer. You energize a transformer with a DC current. So you have this invisible magnetic force. Now when you take the current away, that field collapses down and creates an electron flow. Or it can impart it to another coil of wire.